I hate snowy days. The endless white reminds me of the bones of my kin from that fateful year. It's been 500 years, yet the bloodshed of that day is still vivid in my memory. Humans, all of them deserve to die. Today marks the 36th nameless human to die by my hand. I gazed indifferently as his life faded away, then discarded a bloodied piece of white silk used to wipe my hands. These pathetic lives, unworthy even as my food. Suddenly, something shifted in the air. I tilted my head and sniffed. There was the scent of a human child. Following the trail, I found a small figure at the edge of a cliff. The boy was curled up on a protruding rock, shivering uncontrollably, obviously trapped and unable to climb back up. "Help, help," his voice was faint, barely audible. I looked at him coldly. A human child of this age, if he died now, his soul would still be pure enough to cultivate some herbs. However, I suddenly recalled an ancient technique from my clan. The heart of a truly innocent and pure soul could grant immense demonic power. But such a heart had to be nurtured over years until the child turned 18, free of any blemishes or corruption. With the right care, even the heavens could be defied. This could make for a perfect vessel, I murmured to myself. If he died here, he would merely be food for my herbs. But if I took him back and carefully raised him, he might just be the key to achieving my ultimate goal. I walked to the edge of the cliff, gazing down at him from above. "Do you want to live?" The boy looked up at me. Surprisingly, there wasn't any fear in his eyes, only a peculiar calmness. "Yes," he said. "Then come with me." I extended my hand. Without hesitation, he grabbed hold. Such foolish trust. It reminded me of the humans I had killed before. They too naively believed I wouldn't harm them right until their deaths. I took him back to my lair. He remained silent the entire way, only following closely behind me. "What's your name?" I asked absent-mindedly. It wasn't out of concern, it was easier to give him a label to remember. "Ah, why? Remember, from now on, you belong to me. I'll give you food and shelter, but you must obey me without question. Defy me, and I'll make you wish for death." He nodded. "Okay. You saved me, so I'll listen." I tossed him a soul herb. "Eat it." He caught it and, without a moment's hesitation, put it in his mouth. The bitterness of that herb could make most people gag, yet he didn't even flinch. Interesting, this boy was a little different. "Sister, it's so bitter," he said, and then, under the herb's effects, fell into a deep sleep. I watched his sleeping face, starting to calculate. He was 4 years old this year, 14 more years, and his heart would be ripe. When the time came, I would personally carve out the heart I had so carefully nurtured. Until then, I must keep him pure, shielding him from the taint of the outside world. From today onward, my lair would become his prison. His life and death were entirely in my hands. The next day, he awoke with a high fever. I brewed some medicine and watched as he coughed painfully, my expression unchanged. "Sister, it's so cold," he curled into a ball. "Endure it." Without a glance, I left the lair. His suffering didn't concern me. I only needed him alive. And so, the days passed. I gave him the bare minimum of food and taught him the simplest survival skills. He always looked at me with those clear, innocent eyes, as if I were his sole pillar in this world. Foolish, I thought. But this foolishness was precisely what I needed. The purer the heart, the more potent it would be for my purposes. Late at night, I often gazed at his chest, imagining the heart beating inside. It would be my most perfect sacrifice. As for him, he was nothing more than livestock, meticulously raised for the slaughter. 5 years had passed. I still remember the day I brought him back. Back then, he was nothing but a frail child. Now, at 9 years old, thanks to the effects of the soul herb, he had grown somewhat sturdier. Today was once again the day for him to take his medicine. I retrieved a piece of the soul herb and gazed at the leaf, glowing faintly blue. This was a divine herb nurtured over a century, its every leaf saturated with the essence of countless wandering souls. Over the years, the amount of soul herb this child had consumed was enough to drive any ordinary person mad. Yet, he had become even purer, like a spring of water that would never be tainted. He woke on time and took the herb from me, swallowing it as usual. He never asked why he had to eat such bitter things, nor did he ever complain. This kind of almost dull compliance was exactly what I needed. I hadn't spoken to him in a long time, there was no need. He knew what to do and when to do it, like a well-trained servant. I had taught him to read, to recognize herbs, and to survive in the depths of these mountains. These were all necessary skills to ensure he could live independently, without constantly disturbing my cultivation. On one early summer morning, I went to check on him as usual. Pushing open the door, I found him kneeling on a mat, quietly reading the medical texts I had tossed his way. Sunlight filtered through the vines at the cave entrance, casting dappled shadows over his figure. In that moment, something stirred in me. 500 years ago, my younger sister had also read with such focus. She was the brightest child of the clan, but alas. I shook my head, pushing aside those useless memories. In all these years, I had never let him leave this area. Here, the barrier isolated him from the impurities of the outside world. I needed his heart to remain pure. Occasionally, I would observe him in secret, watching as he practiced the skills I had taught him, converse with the birds, or lay idly on the rocks, lost in thought. I knew he was lonely, but that very loneliness was perfect, sharpening his heart's purity. Last winter, he fell gravely ill. As his fever raged, he kept calling out "Sister" in delirium. I stood by coldly, watching him struggle in pain. It was a necessary process, the medicine from the soul herb was transforming within him. During those days, he wasted away to nearly skin and bones, yet he never gave up, clinging to life with the tenacity of a weed. Amusingly, the first thing he did after recovering was kneel before me and kowtow. "Thank you for worrying about me, sister," he said. Worry? I had never been concerned. If he had died, I could simply have found another vessel. But, after 5 years of investment, it would have been a pity to let it all go to waste. Today was his 9th birthday. The date was one I had set arbitrarily, as he didn't remember his actual birth date. I overheard him muttering in the yard, "Sister, I'm a year older now." Such a ridiculous attachment. What am I to him, I wonder? A distant deity? Or the ever-cold master who feeds him? But none of that mattered. What mattered was that his heart remained as pure as ever. Late at night, I pushed open his door. Under the moonlight, he slept soundly. I extended my hand, sensing the steady rhythm of his heartbeat from afar. Excellent. That heart was developing perfectly. In another 9 years, it would reach maturity. Then, I would take it without hesitation. As I gazed at his sleeping face, I noticed his pillow was damp. So, this seemingly strong child still cried in the dead of night. That was fine, let him cry. His tears would cleanse his heart, making it even purer. I turned and left. Behind me, he mumbled "Sister" in his sleep. I ignored it. In this world, only power endures. Emotions? They're nothing but obstacles on the path to immortality. That night, I gazed up at the full moon, calculating the time remaining. In the end, all the effort I had put into him would pay off. His heart would become my perfect sacrifice. As for his life or death, what did that have to do with me? 3 years passed. I stood outside the cave, watching the young boy practicing in the courtyard. He was now 12 years old, and under the nourishment of the soul herb, he had grown quite tall and strong over the years. Recently, the beasts from the deep mountains had been drawn to this area, likely attracted by the spiritual energy emanating from him. If any of those creatures harmed him, it would mean all my years of effort would be wasted. I added another layer of restriction to the barrier. One day, while I was cultivating inside the cave, I suddenly sensed a disturbance in the barrier. Following the ripple of energy, I saw a fully grown tiger demon circling around Ah Huai. The creature had already developed intelligence and seemed to recognize that the energy within the boy was anything but ordinary. I watched coldly. If he couldn't handle this level of danger, he wasn't worthy of becoming my vessel. Ah Huai stood still, not moving an inch. He did have some courage. The tiger demon suddenly lunged forward, but the boy swiftly dodged, barely avoiding a fatal blow. The movement techniques I had taught him over the years had been well learned. Unfortunately, the creature was far too intelligent for him to handle. Just as the tiger's claws were about to strike him, an unexpected surge of irritation rose within me. Useless. I snorted, flicking my finger. A wave of demonic energy pierced through the barrier, shattering the tiger demon into pieces. Ah Huai turned around and bowed deeply to me. "Thank you, sister, for saving my life." I turned away without a word and returned to the cave. As I looked at my fingers, confusion crept in. The force of that strike was stronger than I intended. It should have been enough just to repel the creature. Why had I killed it outright? Was I worried it would damage my vessel? That must be it. In 6 years, his heart would be fully matured. Until then, I couldn't let any accidents happen. "Sister," his voice came from outside the cave. "I gathered some herbs today. I'd like to prepare some medicine for you." "Leave them." Every time something happened to him, he would do these unnecessary things. He claimed it was to repay a debt of gratitude, not realizing that his life wasn't even his own. Late at night, I pushed open the door to his room. In the moonlight, the boy slept soundly. There were a few faint scratches on his hands, likely from dodging the tiger's claws earlier. I stared at those wounds for a long time but ultimately did nothing. These small injuries could serve as a lesson, a reminder that no one would always be there to protect him. I turned and left, hearing him murmur in his sleep, "Sister." I ignored it. Back in my cave, I resumed my cultivation. The demonic energy within me was growing stronger, on the verge of a breakthrough. Everything was progressing according to plan. But that strike today. I shook my head, dispelling these pointless thoughts. For a cultivator, the greatest taboo was harboring distracting emotions. I had been doing well all these years. I wouldn't fail now, at the final moment. As the night deepened and the dew settled, I heard him coughing softly in the courtyard. It was probably just a cold, something too minor for me to care about. Yet, for some reason, that sound pricked at my ears like a thorn. Weakness. I scolded myself coldly. But before I realized it, my hands were already skillfully preparing medicine. Another year passed. I stood atop the mountain, watching the 13-year-old boy gather herbs in the forest. Over the years, he had finally become somewhat useful. Every day, before dawn, he would search for herbs, recognizing which were medicinal and which were poisonous. He saved me quite a bit of effort. Today, he was once again looking for the dragon-beard grass. This herb grew on the edge of cliffs, and any slight misstep while harvesting could lead to a deadly fall. Yet he never hesitated, always saying it was to repay the kindness of being raised. This child had become increasingly thoughtful. "Sister, look." He suddenly turned around, lifting his basket of herbs, a hint of expectation on his face. Today I found only the finest quality. I glanced at it indifferently. "It's somewhat useful." He didn't mind my lack of enthusiasm and instead smiled even more brightly. Over the years, he seemed to have figured out my temperament, knowing I would never show even a hint of praise. But he never got discouraged, always smiling that foolish smile. It was becoming somewhat irritating. That night, as usual, I went to check on him. When I opened the door, I saw him hunched over a table, writing. He had learned to read and write quickly, and over the years, he had developed a fine hand. "I can never repay sister's kindness in teaching me," the words on the paper read. I snorted coldly. This child was becoming quite good at saying flattering things. But it did save me some trouble. At least I no longer had to worry about him running away. During the frigid midwinter, I was meditating in the mountains when I suddenly heard the sounds of a fight in the distance. Following the noise, I saw Ahwai battling a wolf. The wolf had been trying to attack an injured fawn. This child had developed a sense of compassion. I watched him clumsily struggle with the wolf, my expression cold. A fight of this level wouldn't be fatal. I wanted to see how far he could go. Finally, he drove the wolf away with a branch. Then, he carefully picked up the injured fawn. "Sister," he suddenly looked up in my direction, "the fawn is hurt. May I take it back to heal it?" So, he had long since noticed my presence. His senses had become much sharper over the years. "Do as you wish," I turned to leave, "as long as it doesn't distract you from your duties." After that day, I often saw him caring for the fawn. Occasionally, he would even talk to it. Sister may always look stern, but she's actually very kind. See? She didn't stop me from saving you. Sister must feel very lonely, living alone in these deep mountains. So I must grow up quickly, so I can help her. Why doesn't Sister ever smile? Sometimes I think her eyes hold many secrets, but I don't dare to ask. This child had quite the imagination. When spring came, the fawn recovered. Ahwai released it back into the wild, though he seemed reluctant. Watching him with red-rimmed eyes as he bid the fawn farewell, I suddenly recalled something. 500 years ago, my younger sister had once looked just as reluctant when a healed animal was released. "Sister," his voice broke my thoughts, "thank you for letting me save it." I didn't respond, simply turned and walked away. For some reason, though, my steps felt heavier. Over the years, this child had truly become increasingly good at wearing down one's will. I needed to accelerate my cultivation. I couldn't let these useless emotions interfere with my grand plan. After all, he was destined to be nothing more than my sacrifice. Late at night, I once again heard him talking to the herbs. "You all must grow quickly so you can help Sister with her medicines. Even though she doesn't say it, I know she works very hard." I closed my eyes and continued to cultivate. Yet, that one phrase kept echoing in my mind. "Even though she doesn't say it, I know." He's 15 now. It's a dangerous age. As I watched the boys back, I calculated in silence. 3 more years, and the day to extract his heart would arrive. These years of nurturing him have not been in vain. His heart meridians are growing stronger, and the spiritual energy within him is becoming increasingly pure. But lately, something hasn't been right. At first, it was just his pale complexion. I assumed he was merely overexerting himself with his training. But today, I noticed a sudden disturbance in the power of the linghun grass inside him. This had never happened before. "Big sister," he suddenly collapsed to the ground, his face ashen. I moved closer to examine him and found that his spiritual energy was rapidly draining. This was no ordinary illness. If not stopped in time, it would threaten his heart meridians. All my years of effort would be ruined, but more importantly, I shoved aside those thoughts and quickly sealed his acupoints, temporarily halting the leakage of his energy. But this was just a stopgap. To truly save him, there was only one way. I had to sacrifice a portion of my own cultivation to help him reforge his heart meridians. Foolish, I cursed myself silently. Wasting my cultivation on someone who was destined to die soon was an unwise decision. Yet if I didn't save him, all these years of planning would be wasted. With the moon high in the sky, I began the ritual. My demonic power flowed continuously into his body. Slowly, I began to feel weakened, but his breathing finally steadied. "Big sister," he murmured in his sleep, his voice faint but filled with a sense of peace. I turned my head away. This pointless calling, I had heard it too many times. It was nothing more than a habitual dependency, like how livestock instinctively relies on its caretaker. So why did this particular call irritate me so much? For 3 entire days, I didn't sleep, maintaining the spell at his side. Every time he curled up in pain, I channeled more power to shield him from suffering. This was all to ensure he could survive until the day he was supposed to die. On the fourth day, his fever finally broke. "Thank you, big sister," he said weakly, "for going through so much trouble." "This small matter won't disrupt my plans," I replied coldly. Yet he smiled. "Big sister, you haven't rested these past few days, have you? You look quite pale." I was taken aback. How did he notice? I had kept up a perfectly calm front. "Your hands are shaking," he said softly. "They used to shake like this whenever I got sick." I abruptly stood up and walked away. Since when had he become so perceptive? The details I had painstakingly concealed, the facade I believed to be flawless, were evidently plain to him. "Once you've recovered, go gather more herbs," I said without turning back. "You've wasted enough time, it's time to catch up." "All right." His voice was soft but resolute. "Don't worry, big sister, I'll be fine." I stepped out of the room and looked at my trembling hands. This time, I had used up nearly 30% of my cultivation. For any other demon, such a loss would be negligible, but I was at a critical stage. This loss had set my progress back by 30 years. "It's just an investment in the future," I told myself. After all, his heart is what truly matters. But that voice grew fainter, as if even I didn't fully believe it anymore. Late at night, I heard him talking in his sleep again. This time, he wasn't calling Big Sister. Instead, he was humming a tune. It was a melody he used to hum when he was little. I hadn't realized he still remembered it. I stood in the moonlight, gazing at my shadow. Suddenly, I realized that at some point, it was no longer just my shadow there. "How ridiculous," I muttered softly. But the moonlight continued to fall quietly on the ground, stretching 2 shadows long, so very long. Age 16. I hadn't closely observed this boy for a long time. Ever since his severe illness last year, it seemed like he had grown a lot taller, and there was now a trace of heroic spirit in his features. Just a few days ago, he encountered a rampaging bear demon in the mountains and was actually able to handle it on his own. This was unexpected. Today, I was meditating in my cave when a surge of powerful demonic energy breached my barrier. Whoever it was, their cultivation was impressive, at least a century old. I furrowed my brows. Since when had such a figure come to this remote mountain wilderness? "Who's there?" I asked coldly. "Ha, so there really is an old fox hiding here," an eerie voice replied. Before the voice had finished, a cold gleam cut through the air toward me. I calmly waved my sleeve, shattering the hidden weapon with ease. The intruder was a man dressed in black, his eyes glinting green. He was a snake demon. "This is a secluded mountain. Please be on your way," I said indifferently. I had no desire for unnecessary conflict, especially since Ahwai was nearby. "On my way?" The snake demon sneered. "I've heard you've been raising a human boy here. What sort of treasure are you nurturing? How about sharing it with me?" My gaze chilled. I had meticulously set up a flawless barrier over the years, but it had still been detected. It seemed Ahwai's internal energy had grown too powerful to remain concealed. "There's no need," I said, as I gathered my demonic power. It was clear the snake demon had no intention of backing down, muttering, "Word is you've been cultivating the perfect heart, a once-in-a-lifetime treasure." Before I could strike, a figure stepped in front of me. It was Ahwai. "You won't hurt my sister," he stood tall, his voice firm. My heart trembled. When did he get here? How did he know there was an intruder? Could it be that his senses had grown this sharp? "Ha ha ha," the snake demon laughed. "Interesting human. Do you even know what your so-called sister really is?" Ahwai remained unmoved. "I know." "What?" The snake demon was stunned. "I've always known," Ahwai said calmly. "Sister is a fox demon, and she's been cultivating my heart all these years." Satisfied with that answer? I was shaken to my core. He had known all along? Interesting, the snake demon narrowed his eyes. If you know she's going to kill you, why are you still protecting her? Ah Huai smiled. Because she's my sister. At that moment, the world seemed to spin around me. All these years, my supposedly flawless plan, my carefully maintained indifference, all my disguises, had been completely useless in his eyes from the very beginning. Ah Huai, step back, I ordered, suppressing the turmoil within me. No, he stubbornly stood his ground. Sister already sacrificed 30 years of her cultivation for me. This time, it's my turn to protect her. You're courting death. The snake demon finally made his move, sending a wave of demonic power straight toward Ah Huai. Without thinking, I pulled Ah Huai behind me and unleashed all my demonic energy. In an instant, the entire mountaintop was shrouded in a thick fog of demon power. My true form appeared, 9 snow-white tails swirling in the air. Sensing he was outmatched, the snake demon tried to flee, but it was too late. A flash of white light, and his body turned to dust. As the cave returned to peace, I withdrew my power and turned to Ah Huai. You've known for a long time? Yes, he nodded. I started sensing it around the age of 10. Even though sister concealed her demonic aura well, I could always sense traces of it. Then why? Why did I stay? He smiled. Because I trust sister. I fell silent. In that moment, I didn't know what to say. Years of planning, of calculated cruelty, how could it all seem so meaningless in the face of his simple words, I trust sister? You do realize, I force myself to stay calm, that in 2 more years, I will take your heart. I know. He was still smiling. But until then, I'm still sister's little brother. The moonlight quietly blanketed the mountain forest, and for the first time, I felt a weariness like never before. I had thought I was the hunter, but unknowingly, I had already become ensnared by this boy's sincere heart. And what was more terrifying was that a part of me felt relieved. 17 years old. There is only 1 year left until the day I must take his heart. Lately, I've been feeling restless. After the incident with the snake demon, I noticed that the abnormality in Ah Huai has become more apparent. His spiritual power is growing too fast, far beyond that of a normal human. What's even stranger is that on the night of every full moon, there's a familiar aura emanating from him. That aura reminds me of events from 500 years ago. One day, while meditating, I suddenly sensed a disturbance. It was Ah Huai's aura, but far stronger than usual. I followed it and found him training under the waterfall. Bathed in moonlight, I suddenly noticed faint patterns emerging on his chest. Those were demon markings. No, they weren't just any ordinary demon markings. They were the bloodline imprint unique to my clan. In an instant, memories from 500 years ago flooded back to me. On that fateful night, our clan was struck by disaster, and I fought desperately to help my younger sister escape. During our flight, she insisted on saving an abandoned human infant. She said that no matter how much hatred there was, it shouldn't be passed down to an innocent life. She protected that infant with her demon power and even gave him a trace of her own bloodline. We were separated after that, and I never saw her again, nor did I know what became of that infant. Could it be? I forced myself to calm down and carefully sense the aura within Ah Huai. That familiar pulse of bloodline power was unmistakably left by my sister. Sister? He noticed my presence and turned toward me. In the moonlight, there was a glimpse of my sister in his eyes. That's it. All these years, the reason his gaze always felt familiar to me was because he inherited my sister's demon power and spirit. A profound shock gripped my heart. The sacrifice I had raised for 13 years turned out to be my sister's last concern? The human infant she saved with her demon power and blood? No, this couldn't be true. I took a step back and fled. Sister! He called after me. I pretended not to hear and kept running. I didn't stop until I reached the mountain peak. The wind howled, and I looked down at my hands. These hands that were supposed to take his heart had somehow become accustomed to protecting him. Sister. He had followed me all the way up. Don't call me sister. I shouted at him sharply. But he just smiled. Why can't I? Even if we're not related by blood, aren't we the closest people to each other after all these years? I spun around abruptly. Do you know there's Fox clan blood flowing within you? I can feel it, he said softly. There's a special power inside me, always resonating with your aura. And over the years, even though you've pretended to be cold, you've always protected me. Isn't that proof enough? I fell silent. Yes, over the years, I could have used simpler methods to cultivate his heart. Yet I taught him to read, to practice medicine, to avoid danger. But, I murmured, I can't turn back now. The demon power inside me had reached its limit. If I didn't take his heart soon, I would transform into an uncontrollable wild demon. When that happened, not only would all my efforts be wasted, but his life would be in danger as well. Sister, he suddenly said, do you remember what I told you last year? No matter what happens, I trust you. In the moonlight, his smile remained pure. I suddenly understood why, all these years, I could never truly be cold to him. His kindness was the same unwavering belief my sister had when she saved him. I turned away, not wanting him to see my expression. Go back to sleep. All right. His footsteps slowly faded away. I raised my head to gaze at the moon, my heart a mix of emotions. How ironic was fate. The life my sister saved with her demon power now had to die by my hand. This time, what choice should I make? 18 years old. The day has finally come. I stand outside the cave, watching as the moon slowly rises. Tonight is the full moon, and it is also the final deadline. I can feel the demon power inside me nearing the point of uncontrollability, with every heartbeat accompanied by excruciating pain. I can't wait any longer. Ah, why? I call out. I'm ready, he replies, already waiting in the yard, his expression calm. I lead him to the altar atop the mountain. 500 years ago, this was where my clan performed rituals to the heavens. Tonight, it will witness either my success or my destruction. The moonlight is like water, bathing Ah Huai in its glow. His gaze is identical to the one my sister had when she looked at me 500 years ago, pure and warm. Sister, don't be afraid, he suddenly speaks, I know you're in pain. I freeze. I've been hiding it so well these days, how did he notice? Your hands are trembling, he says softly, just like when you healed me back then. I look down at my hands, and indeed, they are slightly trembling. I don't know when it started, but in front of him, I can no longer hide anything. Come up, I force myself to calm down. He nods, walking up to the altar and kneeling in the center. The moonlight falls upon him, outlining a faint halo around him. The demon markings on his chest are faintly visible, resonating with the demon markings on my own chest. Ah Huai, I begin to speak, but I am interrupted by a sharp pain. The demon power inside me has already started to spiral out of control, as if it's trying to tear me apart. I can feel my true form uncontrollably manifesting, with 9 tails thrashing wildly in the air. Quickly, I manage to say. If I don't take his heart now, I will turn into a bloodthirsty beast. At that point, not only will I lose control, but I'll also hurt him. But Ah Huai stands up and walks toward me. Don't come closer. I shout at him. He ignores my warning and continues to walk toward me. You don't know what I'll do. I roar, my voice beginning to distort, I'll kill you. I'll take your heart. I know, he says calmly, but sister, do you remember what I said when I was 6? I freeze. I said, you look cold, but your eyes are warm. He continues to approach me. All these years, I've known that you were never a cruel person. Shut up. I cover my ears in agony. Every word feels like a sharp blade, cutting into my heart. Sister, this heart was raised by you. He finally reaches me, opening his arms wide. If it can help you break through your inner demons, then take it. I extend my hand, my fingers already transforming into sharp claws. With just one strike, I could take his heart and gain supreme power. At that moment, he smiles warmly. Sister, all these years, I've truly been happy to meet you. That smile, for a moment, overlaps with the last smile my sister gave me. My hand stops in midair. Sister. He still stood there with his arms wide open. Go ahead. Under the moonlight, I looked at the young man before me. 14 years had passed, and he had grown from a frail child into the person he was now. His eyes were still pure, as if time had left no trace on his heart. The demon power inside me roared wildly, each inch of my flesh burning. I could feel myself gradually losing control, turning into a beast that only knew slaughter. Why? I struggled to ask the final question. Why do you trust me so much? Because you taught me so many things, he said softly. You taught me how to read, taught me medicine, taught me how to survive in this world. Those, I gasped, those were just to cultivate your heart. But he smiled. Sister, you can deceive yourself, but not me. If it was really just to cultivate me, why teach me all that? Why protect me day and night when I was sick? Why? Enough! I screamed. Each of his words felt like a sharp knife, cutting into my heart. Sister, he took a step forward. We both know you're not the cold-hearted demon you once were. No. I cannot surrender. 500 years of cultivation, 500 years of waiting, and I was just one step away. Once I took his heart, I would gain supreme power. I would be able to. Ah! A painful scream interrupted my thoughts. I looked down in shock, realizing my claws had pierced into his chest. Blood spread from his clothes, flowing in the moonlight, an especially striking sight. But he did not step back. Instead, he leaned forward, pushing my claws deeper into his body. No! I tried to withdraw my hand, but he held me tightly. It's okay, sister. His voice was as light as a feather. I know you're in pain. This heart, it was always yours. Before he could finish, his body softened and fell into my arms. In an instant, I felt as though I had returned to 500 years ago. That night, my sister had collapsed in the same way. She had also smiled like this before she died, saying, Sister. No! I cried out in grief. The demon power inside me completely lost control in that moment, sweeping over me, threatening to consume me. My rationality was slipping away, and my true form fully revealed itself, with 9 tails flailing wildly in the air. Just then, a faint voice reached me, Sister. I looked down and saw that he still had a faint pulse. With his last bit of strength, he raised his hand and gently wiped away the tears on my face. Don't cry, sister. I'm so happy. In that moment, all the cultivation, all the power, all the ambition, they no longer mattered. I only knew that I could not lose him again. I suddenly understood why my sister had once saved a human infant. Because in this world, there are some things that are more important than power. I pulled my hand away and poured all my demon power into him to prolong his life. At the same time, I began to seal my cultivation. In an instant, 500 years of spiritual power flowed away like water. I could feel my strength rapidly depleting, my body shrinking at an alarming rate. But I was more awake than I had ever been. When the last trace of demon power disappeared, I transformed into a small fox the size of a palm. I no longer had the overwhelming power, nor could I transform back into human form. But Al-Huai survived. The wound on his chest healed quickly under the effect of the demon power I had transferred to him, and the residual spirit grass power in his body was awakened by my demon energy, granting him strength far beyond that of an ordinary human. I curled up on the ground, no longer with the imposing aura I once had. At that moment, I suddenly felt so light. Sister! I heard his voice but dared not lift my head. Once a noble and cold fox demon, now I was just an ordinary little fox. I curled up on the ground, unsure of how to face him. But he gently picked me up. His hands were steady, as if he wanted to hold me close to his heart. It was then that I noticed, I didn't know when, but the moon had already begun to set in the west. The first light of dawn broke through the clouds and spilled over the mountain peak. For the first time in 500 years, I felt the sunlight as something so warm. "Sister, let's go home." He carefully cradled me in his arms, just like the time when I brought him back to the cave all those years ago. I smelled the familiar scent on him, a mixture of the demon power I had given him and a warmth that I could not quite explain. At this moment, I suddenly understood something. It turned out that true strength never came from cultivation, but from the purest bond deep within the heart. My sister understood this truth long ago, and it took me 500 years to realize it. Alhuai lowered his head to look at me, his gaze gentle. "Sister, this time, it's my turn to protect you." I finally stopped struggling and rested my head on his chest, listening to the heartbeat of the heart I had nurtured. It was still beating. And this time, it was beating for me. End of the story.
Extra chapter, Heart's Desire. I first met my sister when I was 4 years old. It was snowing heavily that day, and I had gotten lost in the mountains. The cold and fear almost consumed me, but when I looked up and saw her, all my fear disappeared. She stood in the snow, her white clothes brighter than the snow, her gaze cold, yet she was so beautiful, unlike any mortal. "Sister, are you a goddess?" I asked innocently. She didn't answer, only took me back to the cave. At that time, I didn't know she took me back to take my heart. The earliest memories were bitter. Every day I had to swallow bitter medicine, but I never resisted. Because I noticed that whenever I obediently took the medicine, her gaze toward me would soften a little. In the winter when I was 6, I fell seriously ill. That was when I first discovered that my sister wasn't as indifferent as she seemed. Every night, I could feel someone tucking me in and feeding me medicine. I pretended to be asleep, but I could hear her soft sighs. At that moment, I understood. My sister's coldness was just a disguise. When I was 10, I began to feel a strange power inside me. Whenever my sister was nearby, this power would stir uneasily. At first, I thought it was because of the medicine, until one day, I saw faint markings on my chest reflected in the water. Those markings looked very similar to the ones on my sister's neck. I began to secretly observe her. I noticed that on every full moon night, she would emit a special aura, and the power inside me would resonate with it. I gradually realized that I was different from ordinary people. When I was 12, I encountered the tiger demon. I was actually very scared, but I was more afraid that my sister would worry about me. When she came to my rescue, I saw her hands trembling. At that moment, I wanted so much to hug her and tell her I was fine. But I couldn't. I knew she was forcing herself to remain indifferent. As I grew older, I became more aware of how special my sister was. The patience with which she taught me to read, the seriousness with which she taught me medicine, the focus with which she taught me martial arts, these were not things someone would do for just a cultivation sacrifice. I also noticed that my feelings toward her had changed. I didn't know when it started, but I began to long for the time I could be alone with her. She was quiet, but every glance made my heart race. I knew these feelings were not ordinary, yet I could not explain them. When I was 15, I accidentally overheard her speaking to the moon. She said, "Sister, forgive me." At that moment, fragments of the past suddenly flooded my mind. I remembered when I was very young, there seemed to be a gentle woman who held me in her arms and gave me a breath of warmth. That warmth was similar to my sister's, yet also different. So that was it. I finally understood why I was different. After the incident with the snake demon at 16, I saw my sister show the first signs of hesitation. I wanted so much to tell her that I had always known everything and never blamed her. But I was more afraid that saying it would make her sad. It wasn't until the full moon night when I was 18 that I finally understood. Watching her struggle and pain, I realized that my feelings for her had long surpassed simple dependence. I wanted to protect her, I wanted to free her, and I wanted her to understand that there was more to life than just the pursuit of cultivation. When her claws pierced into my chest, it didn't hurt at all. Because I knew she was in more pain than I was. In the end, when she transformed into a little fox and curled up in my arms, I finally dared to say the words that had been buried in my heart for years. Sister, this time, it's my turn to protect you. This time, I will use the rest of my life to make her understand what true bonds are. Just like the woman who saved me back then, giving me new life with her demon power. And today, I will use this power, with all my feelings, to protect this awkward yet adorable sister. This is the happiness I have always wanted.